We were doing some comparing and contrasting of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. And we said that we really needed to have a Constitution because the Articles of Confederation were so weak. And the biggest weakness was their inability to collect taxes. And with no money, they weren't really able to do any of the things that they were able to do. So the need for Constitution really came to the forefront. So our forefathers, our framers, our founding fathers, they created a Constitution, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, the different parts of it, what actually makes the Constitution up. So the Constitution is comprised of really three parts. The preamble, which sets forth the goals of the Constitution. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's the preamble. After the preamble, the Constitution has 7 articles. 7 articles, with each article outlining different responsibilities. Article 1 is about the legislative branch. It establishes the legislative branch. All the powers of Congress. It establishes a bicameral legislature comprised of what 2 houses? The Senate and the House of Representatives. It also sets out qualifications for holding office, terms of office. For example, if you are elected to be a member of the House of Representatives, how long is your term? 2 years. If you're elected to be a United States Senator, how long is your term? 6 years. Did you guys know that we have a senatorial election going on right now?
Really?
Yeah.
So, Manchin might be getting out?
No, it's not Joe Manchin. It's Shelley Moore Capito and Paula Jean Swearengin. Are you aware that Paula Jean lives in Coal City?
No. Really?
Yeah.
I always confused.
She's running for senator, and she lives in Coal City. Yeah. Okay.
Nick's gonna hear what Casey said on the thing. What his live.
Okay. All right. So we were establishing the legislative branch. 6 years for a senator, 2 years for a House of Representative member. The Article 1 also comes up with the system of apportionment. Do you guys know what that is?
Like checks and balances.
Apportionment. 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 It's like divvying out how many representatives each state has based upon the population of the state. That's called apportionment. Like smaller states have less power because they have less population. All right. Article 1 also says that the population must be enumerated every 10 years. What does enumerated mean? Counted, numbered, that's enumerated. And so every 10 years we have a census, and that is established by Article 1 of the Constitution. Why would the Constitution require a population count?
So they can get how many?
That's right. So they can do apportionment. Make sense? Okay. So that's just a few of the things. We haven't even got to the actual powers. The most important section in Article 1 is Section 8. Article 1, Section 8. This is where the enumerated powers are. What does the word enumerated mean?
Counted.
Yeah, counted, numbered. So these are the numbered powers. What do you think that means?
Ones that are guaranteed under the Constitution?
So say it again, Hunter.
Ones that are guaranteed under the Constitution?
Well, if it's in the Constitution, yeah. But they are, yeah, sure. But if they're numbered, it's basically a list. These are things that are explicitly written in the Constitution that, no doubt about it, the federal government has these powers. Okay? That's the enumerated powers. There's 17. There's 17 enumerated powers. It's things like regulating trade, declaring war, making treaties, establishing a post office, printing money, things of that nature. There's 17 powers that are listed, enumerated, no doubt about it. Those are things the federal government does. Those are the enumerated powers. In addition, the last clause of Article 1, Section 8 says, Congress shall make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into foregoing executive powers. Necessary and proper. That's called the necessary and proper clause. So, how is that different than enumerated?
Is that like the elastic clause?
It's not like guaranteed powers.
Okay. Yes and yes.
Like once the war comes in, we get more.
Yeah, the necessary and proper clause is the elastic clause. Just because it's not specifically written in the Constitution doesn't mean that the government can't provide laws for it. For example, what was the speed limit in New York City in 1790 when
How fast your horse can go.
there wasn't one? Now, that doesn't mean that it's the federal government's job to make speed limits, because it's not. But things change over time, and Congress and the Congress has the ability to adapt and evolve to make laws that are needed and proper, not necessary and proper. Okay? Does that make sense? The necessary and proper clause is also called the elastic clause, because it gives Congress the power to stretch, just like elastic in your waistband. It stretches. All right? Now, the necessary and proper clause is the basis for the implied powers. That's what it does. This is what gives Congress the ability to make laws that are not in the Constitution. Congress, as a result, there's a lot of laws about establishing federal minimum wage, maximum hour working a week, mandating drug testing for certain workers. Those things are allowed. They can make laws like that, even though it's not in the Constitution, because it's implied. All right? Questions on Article 1. Article 2 establishes the executive branch. So right off the bat, we're totally different than the Articles of Confederation, because they didn't even have an executive branch. So Article 2 creates executive power. That is, what is the job of the executive branch? To enforce, execute, carry out the laws of the nation. So the legislative branch makes the laws. The executive branch carries them out, enforces them. The first part, Section 1 of Article 2, sets the president's terms of office. If you're elected president, how long are you president? 4 years. Section 1 also explains the Electoral College. It also comes up with some qualifications for office. What are the qualifications for office of President of the United States? Huh?
An age limit.
Which is
35.
35 years old.
You have to have been born in America.
You must be a natural-born citizen. You cannot be naturalized. You have to be a native-born citizen. Anything else?
Isn't there something like you have had to live in the country?
There is. There's a residency requirement.
Like 18 years or something?
14.
Wow.
14 years. Very good. So there are some qualifications. There's also in the first section of Article 2 talks about what happens if the president dies in office or becomes disabled or needs to be removed. So it outlines impeachment. All right, in Section 3 of Article 2, the powers of the president are outlined. First and foremost, the president is in charge of our armed forces. And what is that title the president has?
Military.
Oh, the title
Yeah, when it's a role of the president, and when
Commander-in-Chief.
Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces. The president also has the authority to make treaties. It's their job to make treaties. Just because the president makes it, does it become official? No. How does a treaty become official?
To get it approved?
Who has to approve it?
The Congress?
Yeah, the Senate. Checks and balances. So yeah, the president can make any treaty he wants, but it doesn't have the force of law until the Senate approves it. Let's see. The president has the ability to appoint lots of different people. Anybody that represents the United States in another country, the president picks. So all ambassadors, all diplomats, public ministers, all members of the judicial branch at the federal level, whether you be a federal judge or a Supreme Court justice, are appointed by the President of the United States, and they all report to the President directly, really. Let's see. The President, in that section, it also says the President has to report to Congress from time to time. Does the President ever give a report to Congress every once in a while? Every year in the State of the Union. Now, that's what we have done. That's just kind of what it has become known as. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the president has to give the State of the Union address. It just says the president is compelled to report directly to Congress from time to time.
So it wouldn't have to be year to year? Like it wouldn't have to be like every year?
Not necessarily. However, all right, but who did it first? George Washington. Guess how often he did it?
Every year.
Every year.
So
It's a precedent set by the president. Okay? A lot of things are done the way George Washington did them just because that's how George Washington did it. One of which is the State of the Union annually. Sorry. So questions on Article 2? Article 3 establishes the judicial branch, mainly the Supreme Court. Federal courts, as well as the Supreme Court, basically what the Constitution says that the power that they have is to settle disputes between states, between state and national government. But as far as really what the Supreme Court's job is not really put in the Constitution. The Supreme Court kind of writes their own job description. And they do it in a Supreme Court case. Which one? Marbury versus Madison, where that Supreme Court case establishes what power?
judicial review.
The power of judicial review. For the most part, once you become a member of the federal judicial system, usually in the Supreme Court, how long is your term?
Life.
Life or retirement. Also, as long as you have good behavior, you can be removed. And so they have certain protections. Like once a Supreme Court justice becomes a Supreme Court justice, they can't have their salaries lowered to be punished by the Senate or anything like that. Once they're in there, they can only go up. That's what the first 3 of the 7 articles do. They really just establish our 3 branches of government. All right? All right, so I thought I had another one. Well, Articles 4 through 7, let me tell you about those. All right, Articles, the remainder of the Articles are all about anticipating problems with the first 3. So Article 4 begins with what we refer to as the full faith and credit clause. You ever heard of that? All right. We went from a system of government which had strong, powerful states and a weak federal government. And each state had their own laws, which were important. Well, now we're going to a stronger federal government and weaker state governments. And what this does is it says that contracts that are made in one state are binding and enforceable in every other state. Like, if you go get married in Las Vegas, are you married in West Virginia?
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the full faith and credit clause. Makes sense, right? If you get a driver's license in West Virginia, can you drive in any state? Yes, because of the full faith and credit clause. Okay? That's Article 4. Article 5 is all about how changes could be made, the amendment process. I got a whole other section on the amendment process. But basically, the Constitution's been changed 27 times, with the first 10 added all at once. Article 6 contains the supremacy clause. Do you guys know what the supremacy clause does? No. Basically, it says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. What does that mean?
So it's that is the president.
It is the highest power. It is the highest power. So, really, if there's a state law that conflicts with federal law, which one is supreme? Federal, because of the supremacy clause. Doesn't seem like that big a deal, but this is really important. Without the supremacy clause, the federal government would have very little enforceable power. Otherwise, states could continue to do whatever they wanted. But when this is with the supremacy clause, it really gives the federal government teeth, gives the authority to have that power. What else? In addition, in the 6th article, it talks about how it doesn't matter what religion you are, there'll be no religious test shall be required to hold office. So if you're elected, you're elected. Doesn't matter what religion you are. And it really gets strengthened when the Bill of Rights is added, because the First Amendment continues the separation of church and state. The 7th and final article basically concerns the procedures for ratification. How are we going to go from not having a constitution to having a constitution? The ratification process. And that's what we're going to look at next. Because how many states of the 13 that we had to ratify before it would become law? 9 of the 13. So, and it was not an easy thing. We were definitely divided. And the two sides that were at odds with one another were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. What great names, right? Now, these are not political parties. The Federalists eventually become a political party, but that's a political party. These are just the two sides when it came to ratification of the Constitution. All right? The Federalists favored a strong federal government. Typically, the Federalists were property owners, wealthy people, merchants, kind of elitist, saw themselves as the most fit to be in charge, most fit to govern. And this is Federalists. What is it?
Was it strong central government?
Say it one more time.
Was it strong central?
Yeah, the Federalists wanted a strong central government. They were elitist. They saw themselves as the best people in charge to rule. They wanted a powerful central government. And they were, in terms of foreign allegiances, they were pro-British and anti-French. All right? That's important for future alliances. The anti-federalists are typically your small farmers, your shopkeepers, your laborers, not the wealthiest people. Believed in the decency of the common man, and that instead of it being just a few educated, wealthy people in charge, it should be a participatory democracy, that the people should be in charge. Most people. And they did this because they viewed the elites as corrupt. Or at least there would be potential corruption. And the Federalists would counter that by saying, well, you guys, if you let everybody make decisions, you guys are a bunch of morons. You're just a bunch of farmers. Why don't you leave the decision making to the educated people? I can see both sides. The Anti-Federalists also wanted to have a greater protection of individual rights. And they wanted state governments to be strong, because they thought that the states were closer to the people, and they were fearful of having a strong national authority. Okay? And they were anti-British and pro-French. So, a lot of Americans were still pretty distrustful of a strong central government. And they didn't, and the people, the Federalists, did not want to be labeled as like nationalists, like monarchists even. So they tried to get the upper hand in the debate by that's why the Anti-Federalists don't have a cool name of their own. They were called the Anti-Federalists. Like, it was a political move by the Federalists weren't even called the Federalists. They just called the people that disagreed with the ratification Anti-Federalists. And then the name Federalists just kind of spawned out of that. So Anti-Federalists and Federalists participated in a lot of meetings, town hall meetings, in state legislatures, where they debated the pros and cons of the new Constitution. Tempers ran very high. You think the last presidential debate we had was, people were getting angry. You should have seen these debates, extremely, wildly crazy. Debates were held at town hall meetings and state legislatures, and newspapers published all kinds of articles about the ratification process. Soon, you begin to see a lot of opinion pieces emerging. The most famous of the opinion pieces were on the side of choosing for ratification, and those was, what are they called? The Federalist Papers. Of those opinion papers, one name, nobody wrote under the real name. Everybody just chose a pseudonym. But one name stood out amongst them, and that was Publius. Publius. Publius is Latin. It means people. But Publius is not one person. Publius is three people. And Publius wrote 85 essays. You guys think you guys write a lot of essays. These guys wrote 85 letters or papers or whatever you want to call them. And they appeared in newspapers predominantly in New York, because that was the second largest state in the United States. And they were in doubt as to whether or not they would ratify. Who were the three authors?
John Jay, James Madison.
James Madison. Hamilton and Madison wrote the majority. They wrote the majority. Hamilton wrote 51 of them, so he actually wrote the most. Madison wrote 26, and then John Jay wrote like 5.
Me.
Hey, he wrote more than I wrote. All right, so these 85 essays are now referred to as the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers, and they discuss a lot of things. They're like masterful explanations of what the framers' intentions were in the new Constitution. Like Federalist Paper number 10, for example, calls, according to Federalist Paper number 10, the Constitution was a Republican remedy for the disease of hang on, let me read this right. According to Federalist number 10, the new Constitution was called a Republican remedy for the disease incident to Republican government. So what this does is it really is a clear articulation of the political theories and philosophies that lie at the heart of our Constitution. And that they were published it wasn't just in New York, they were published throughout a lot of the colonies. But the Anti-Federalists, they wrote some papers of their own. And they wrote theirs under pen names like Brutus and Cato. Do you guys know these names?
Like from Caesar.
It's from their Romans, okay? Those are two ancient Romans. And what did Brutus do?
Backstab. Caesar.
He killed a tyrant.
Yeah.
That's what he did. He killed a tyrant. So what do you think the key idea of the Anti-Federalists was?
To take down the tyranny.
That's right. We don't want this big, strong, tyrannical government. We want small, powerful state governments. And these letters, were like a line-by-line critique of the Constitution. Like everything, they'd write a line from the Constitution, and then they just trash it. And then they put another line, and they just trash it. So the Anti-Federalists, they argued that a strong central government would make the states powerless, and they believed that a strong central government would tax heavily, and that they would trample on the rights of individual people because the federal government has an army, and the states did not. And so they had the power to do it. So in order to get this thing approved or ratified, it took some convincing. So the debate went on in all 13 states, even in Rhode Island, who didn't even show up to the Constitutional Convention. And once the Constitution was finished and it began to be debated amongst the states, some states quickly entered, usually the smaller states. What was the first state of the United? What is the first state in the United States? What's the first state?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say Pennsylvania.
Good guess.
New York.
Maryland.
Delaware.
Delaware.
What?
Delaware is the first state. Well, what makes them the first state?
They ratified first.
They're the first state to ratify.
Delaware was like, oh.
Maybe not.
Another small state, which you wouldn't think would be small today, but it was a very small state in 1791, New Jersey. That was the second state. Pennsylvania was third. Pennsylvania, the Federalists were very well organized.
No, Georgia.
Mm. What?
Was it Georgia last? No.
No.
Oh. Never mind.
You're thinking of the Continental Congress. Okay? All right, so, but how many states did they got to get?
9.
What was the ninth state?
Is it a southern one?
Was it
Is
Virginia?
it like a common one that like we wouldn't guess?
New Hampshire.
Okay.
Yeah, I would've
New
guessed
Hampshire.
that. Yeah, I figured it was the
They
same.
ratified on June 21st, 1788, which completed the ratification process. However, New York, and Virginia were not in those 9 states. New York and Virginia constituted 40% of the entire nation's population.
And 40% didn't want to ratify.
And 40% of our nation was really undecided. So it became a pretty important issue to get Virginia and New York to ratify the Constitution. Who do you think the 2 people were that were most influential in convincing these states? Hamilton where?
New York.
New York.
Where's he from?
New York.
What about Virginia?
Thomas Jefferson.
Madison. Where's he from? Virginia. And they're Federalists. So Hamilton in New York and Madison in Virginia worked feverishly to convince the delegates in their states to vote for the new government. In New York, there was a pretty deep sentiment against this Constitution. In Albany, the capital of New York, not New York City, Albany is, in Albany, fighting even broke out over ratification that resulted in injuries and death.
Oh no.
People were killing each other over the ratification of the Constitution. Yeah. The only thing that convinced New York was that Madison was able to convince Virginia, which was the largest state. Virginia was the largest state. Virginia went, and that convinced a lot of New Yorkers to go as well. But they would only go if there would be some amendments added to help protect people's rights. And many states were with that. So that's 11. We still got 2 holdouts. Can you guys guess the 2 holdouts? Rhode Island,
Georgia, New Hampshire,
North Carolina.
It's always the Carolinas.
North Carolina and Rhode Island continued to hold out against ratification. Both had recently just printed up some new money for their state, which they were allowed to do under the Articles of Confederation. And they feared that the value of that money would plummet, obviously, if it became obsolete, because there would be no more such thing as state money, because only the federal government would have the ability to print money. So they needed a little bit more convincing. So North Carolina, they don't fall. They ratify before Rhode Island. And Rhode Island was the only state that didn't even send representatives to the Constitutional Convention. And they remained out of the nation until 1790. But when their largest cities like Providence were like, hey, state government, we are going to secede from the state if you don't ratify this Constitution. They had a convention, and they ratified 34 to 32. So it was not overwhelming in Rhode Island either. Okay, so that's how we get all 13 states to ratify. It was unanimous. And George Washington had already been president a year when Rhode Island ratifies. But most of the states said that the Constitution needed something extra. And in fact, they said that their ratification was conditional on something being added to it. What is it they wanted added? The Bill of Rights. Once the Constitution was ratified, elections took place, which immediately sent out a set of amendments for ratification. Okay. This is where the article, I think it's Article 6 on how we make amendments to the Constitution, that's where it comes into play. They had to follow the Constitution. Or, I'm sorry, Article 5. Article 5. So, basically, the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And they were ratified in 1791 in accordance with the procedures set out in the Constitution. And this is a victory for anti-federalists. The Federalists had a victory with the ratification of the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists have a victory with the Bill of Rights. Both of them win. How about that? So, what are the Bill of Rights? Don't give me definitions. I want to know, like, okay, yeah, they're your protections of your civil liberties, your individual liberties. It's limitations on government. These are things the government cannot do to you. They cannot do these things. The government cannot infringe with your religion. If you're arrested, there are certain things the government cannot do to you. They can't just throw you in the slammer and leave you in there without a trial or without an attorney. All of these are your protections of your civil liberties. You have the right for free expression and speech and religion and press and petition. These are your safeguards. These are for you, your individual protections, not government, big government things the government can do. These are for individual citizens of the United States. So, in order for these changes to be added, we had to know that it can be changed. And there's really a two-stage amendment process: proposal and ratification. It's like this. This is how amendments are made. It's proposed in Congress. So a senator or a House of Representatives person stands up and says, I propose an amendment. I want to change the Constitution. Then 2/3, 66.7% of the congressmen have to vote for it. Not a simple majority. 2/3. Then, if it passes by 2/3, then it goes to the states. And what percentage of the states have to ratify it?
Isn't it all of them?
3/4.
3/4, 75% of the states. That is the usual method by which amendments are made. There is another way, which is done using conventions. No amendment has ever been made that way. But it's still there. It's still in the books. All right? So the ratification process is fairly straightforward, but it's not easy to do. Can you get 2/3 of Congress to agree on anything?
No.
Probably not. And then if you do, 75% of the states. So what's 75% of 50? You math people. I'm sorry, I don't do math. What?
Chase. It's like 38. It's like
38, 39, somewhere in there?
Or 37, 38.
Yeah.
Because you can't have a half session.
Yeah. So it's a pretty straightforward process, but when Congress proposes the amendment, then you got to get 3/4 of the state legislatures. Now, within the state, it's simple majority. It's not the states have to get a simple majority, but 75% of the states have to get the simple majority. Okay? Now, that's not the only way the Constitution, that's the formal way. It can change in other ways too, like Marbury versus Madison. Did that really define the role of the Supreme Court and change Article 3 forever? Yeah, so judicial interpretation can definitely change how the Constitution works. Let's see. What about like social and cultural change? Can that change the Constitution? I mean, is racism built in the Constitution? Yeah. With what? The Three-Fifths Compromise. Do you think our founding fathers envisioned an African American president? No. Without a doubt, they did not. Even though Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence believes that all men are created equal, that's really not what he had in mind. The abolition of slavery hadn't occurred when it was created. Even the diverse roles of women in today's society, there's no specific guarantees for women in the Constitution. There's specific guarantees for African Americans now. No more slavery, no more things of that nature. But women don't have no protections in there. Yet we still have social change. Like women, for the most part, are still seen as equal, even though not treated equal in many cases. But because of the changes over time, like after the Great Depression and the New Deal, the role of the government changed immensely and enormously, and you can never go back. You can never go back. Think of think of the federal government as like a glove, okay? And it's soft and it's leather, all right? And if a really big hand gets put inside that glove, the glove stretches. And then it never shrinks. It can only get larger. And that's kind of how the federal government and the office of the presidency works. You have a big power, like when Andrew Jackson became president, it grew. And then somebody else will try to put a smaller hand in there, but the government is still big. Even though the president uses less power, the government's still large. When FDR became president, the glove grew exponentially. And that power is still, the government is still significantly larger. Okay, so even technology can. I'm not saying that they make formal changes to the Constitution, but technology can make changes as well. We got the internet, television, cell phones, security surveillance systems, and are those things okay for you to be on camera 24 hours a day? Well. Do you think our founding fathers had that in mind? You were being surveilled on a video recording device? No, of course not. But technology has required us to make some changes. Okay? Not to mention Social Security and all those other types of things. Okay, so I finished chapter 2. So we may move up our schedule a little bit because I had another day of notes planned. So if you're looking at Schoology, it'll be off a day because I don't need to do any more notes for chapter 2. So everything will be moved up a day, and I'll fix that pretty soon. So tomorrow we'll do an assignment. You're going to have a vocabulary quiz on Thursday, or probably Wednesday. Vocabulary quiz Wednesday, and then test, I guess, Friday. Test Friday, because I'm moving everything up a day. All right, has everybody got that?
Is the reading guide still for tomorrow, or do you want the reading guide tomorrow?
Tomorrow. Is it on there? Is it on Schoology today?
No, tomorrow. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, it's on the
Yeah, I think it's on there.
Tomorrow.
Oh,
Tomorrow.
I don't know, last Wednesday you weren't. I couldn't pull that
Couldn't work? Couldn't get it to work?
Yeah, I couldn't pull it up, and then I emailed you about it, and then I never
But I
saw
did.
it.
Did I write
Yeah,
you?
you
Okay.
wrote it back. I finally found it.
Okay.